Hi, I'm Kelly Lynch, and this is U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm George Smart, and nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. Every February, they have this huge architecture and design festival called Modernism Week, a week that actually lasts 11 days. It's a dazzling spectacle of architecture, shopping, architecture movies, martinis, parties, tours, exhibits, and even a store that sells just old architecture magazines and books, nothing else. You have to just stop by and see it. Bruce Emerton on North Palm Canyon. Tell him we sent you. If you're into mid-century modern, this is really the Woodstock of all the architecture we love, an event not to be missed. We were there at Modernism Week talking with nearly all the keynote speakers, authors, and special guests.
And I'm Tom Guile. George let me come along with him. It was my first time at Modernism Week, but I got to see swanky, super cool Homes of the Stars. I got to see Frank Sinatra's Hi-Fi, which looks like it was made in 1948 and is military grade issued, has its own record cutter turntable.
You can print discs there, I guess. You can make them.
I didn't try. I was afraid of upsetting Frank. And Kirk Douglas's backyard has a back door to Dinah Shore's backyard.
Yes.
So that they used to go and play tennis together. And I didn't get to go through the door because I don't think Dinah wanted. But Dinah's not around, is she?
No, Leonardo DiCaprio owns that place now.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Leonardo wasn't really in the mood for tennis that day. Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Realtor Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for bringing modernist design expertise to buyers and sellers. Reach Angela at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550.
Want to go with U.S. Modernist to Modernism Week in 2020? Send George, a.k.a. Mr. Modernism, an email at george@usmodernist.org, and we'll send you information. Craig Ellwood was one of the most exciting figures in American architecture. He took L.A. by storm, and no one since has fully captured his personal style or his incredible story. George talks poolside at the swinging Hotel Skylark with Craig Ellwood's daughter, Erin Ellwood, his partner, architect Jim Tyler, producer Maria Demopoulos, who's working on a new feature film about Ellwood, and expert Ellwood designer and restorer Barton Jahncke, who has brought more than one ailing house back to life.
If you don't know the name Craig Ellwood, look it up, because you're going to be pretty happy with what you've found. Craig Ellwood was not only one of the most exciting architects of his generation, but he was also one of the most interesting people of that generation. He accomplished so much in a short amount of time through the Arts and Architecture Case Study House program and many other buildings and residences that he was involved in. And we're here talking with four people who are working on a new project, a new movie about Craig Ellwood, which will be coming out hopefully soon. Let's start with you, Maria. Tell us about the film and how it's getting going and when people can see it.
Well, my background is as a documentary filmmaker, and I started off doing interviews with all of the people who are still around, who knew Craig Ellwood, and I started going through the family archives and collecting photographs, and it was just such an inspiring process to learn about his personal life. And the movie's really about the paradox between his pristine, beautiful, minimalist buildings and his messy, complicated personal life, and his narcissism, and how yet that's also reconciled with his insecurity. I think a lot of times with movies about architects, or especially when we talk about modernism, there's like this preciousness around it. And so I just got really excited about kind of piercing that and going into who he was in the case of this story, and how it affected his work.
Well, I'm really happy to have you here, Erin, to meet you finally. Erin is
you.
the daughter of Craig Ellwood, and of course you got to experience a lot of this growing up.
It certainly did. It was a very colorful, interesting, vibrant, unusual childhood, I would say. Nice to be here, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And you have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 brothers. Neither one of them is remotely into design or architecture. I'm the only one that seemed to have got that gene, I guess.
Well, it doesn't spread to everybody. I've talked to a lot of architects' families, and sometimes it just hits one, which is enough, right?
Yeah, it got me.
To make it go forward. So what is your career?
My career is I was in the film business for years as a production designer. I designed sets for mostly television commercials. I did a few films, but mostly TV commercials. Kind of got sick of life in LA. I moved to Ojai. And
isn't that where everyone goes to get away from it all?
Especially now.
Yeah.
Especially now. But so now I'm doing mostly interior design work.
Okay.
And I also do digital content. I shoot advertising things for lifestyle brands.
Okay.
So it kind of merges both worlds because I love film. I miss film. I'm not doing it as much as I used to, but it merges the two, which is fun.
So I assume you're going to be in this film in some way? Oh, no?
No.
You're going to be behind the scenes?
Yes, the film began really as a documentary. That's what we thought we were going to do. But how many years in? We got 4 years into it and realized we want to do a scripted piece. So Maria's working on writing a screenplay right now.
Okay.
So it will be with actors. It is not a documentary. There might be some footage from real events. We have very little footage, actually. We have a lot of photography, but very little footage, which was one of the reasons we realized it couldn't really be a documentary.
Okay. There are not that many scripted series about architects at all. I mean, most of them are in the documentary form, right?
Yeah.
I know there's one coming up about Mies van der Rohe.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be live action with Maggie Gyllenhaal and Jeff Bridges.
Correct.
I think that's
about the Farnsworth house.
About the Farnsworth house, yeah. It's going to be coming out maybe this summer. I know they filmed it already.
Yep.
So there's one. That's a great lead-in for you. One of the things that Craig left behind are these incredibly detailed houses that are unique in so many ways. But one way that they're unique is they're just incredibly highly prized now. And Barton, you have a special relationship with a number of these houses.
I do.
Tell us about that.
Well, over the past couple of years, I've been fortunate enough to have stepped into the role of, designing and working on the architectural restorations of 4 Craig Ellwood houses. So I guess, very lucky to have lived in these pristine spaces and worked on them. I'm sitting here next to a guy who worked for Craig Ellwood for over 12 years in the office, and named James Tyler, and he mentors me through these projects. So I'm blessed to be able to walk in and have somebody tell me what they would have done out of the office and how everything was done in the mid-century. It's been not only humbling, but it's also been, a life lesson and a history class all in one. I mean, he's the last keeper of the mid-century knowledge and relationships, even from the case study program, Arts and Architecture. He's close with the Eames. Jim did all of Pierre Koenig's work when Pierre got a little bit old, and did a lot of Lautner's work when they needed things fixed up. So Jim is kind of the landscape of LA. He did Art Center for Craig Ellwood. Jim came from a line of Mies van der Rohe. Jim had been from Salt Lake City, Utah, and worked for a guy named John Sugden, who was kind of the modernist architect in Salt Lake. And John Sugden had been an associate at Mies van der Rohe. So, the glass and steel levity that Craig brought out to the world, a lot of that in the years from about 65 on were with Jim, and they got bigger projects and did a lot of beautiful, beautiful homes and beautiful steel and glass, structures, banks, and industrial buildings, SDS, and it's very, very important. So I think over the past 3 years, I've been lucky enough to start with the Smith House in Crestwood Hills and worked on Casa Cuderna and Cahuenga Pass. Now I'm in the middle of doing the Hunt House and getting that on the National Register of Historic Places to be able to be landmarked. And I'm also working on the Zach House in Crestwood Hills and doing a lot of the back of the house now again. So it's a good thing. I've learned a lot.
So, Jim, how did you meet Craig Ellwood?
I admired Craig because I was in school at the University of Utah, and I worked for this fellow who had worked for Mies van der Rohe. So I learned a lot about steel and glass buildings. But when I was in school, for breaks, I'd go to the library and I'd look at, all the books and the periodicals that were coming out. I loved Arts and Architecture magazine.
Oh, what a great magazine.
I couldn't. And then they had this series of buildings they called the case study houses. And there was Pierre Koenig and a guy named Craig Ellwood. And so I admired the two of them because they were more enriching in the way that I understood architecture. I had no dream at all that I would ever work for one of them, So I just went to L.A. one time on a summer vacation with my wife, and I dropped in Craig's office. It was mostly like fawning. I would
You're
like
a fanboy, yeah.
I wanted to meet this guy. And I just went into the drafting room. The secretary said, you can go in there and talk to some of the guys. And so I went in and I talked to them. And then one of the fellows said, would you like to meet Craig? And I thought, oh, my goodness, yes. And he said, okay. And so he walked in and Craig was in his office. And so he introduced me to Craig. So Craig was really nice. He sat down, talked to me about my background. And then he says, I happen to be just going to lunch. Would you want to go with me? And I said, sure. And so we went to a restaurant, El Coyote.
Okay.
A wonderful restaurant, and my wife and I still go all the time. But anyway, Craig took me in. We talked about architecture and so on, and Craig was doing some large buildings for a manufacturing company, Scientific Data Systems. And the very first building they were working on was a manufacturing facility in El Segundo. And so he said, Jim, I'm doing a large building, and I would like to have someone that I would have confidence in that's very familiar with steel buildings and so on. He says, do you have any photographs of anything you've done? I had done 2 houses for people that I knew. I lived in a housing complex with my wife, and they graduated, and I got to do houses for them.
Wow.
It was really fun. But anyway, I showed the houses to Craig, and Craig then said, I want you to come and work for me. And I said, I don't want to come to L.A. And he said, why? And I said, I think it's an ugly city. I'm just a small town guy, And so he said, I will move you down, and I want you to work on this project. And it'll probably take us about a year to finish. He said, if you don't like it after 1 year, you can pack up and I'll pay your way, your family and everything. I'll move you back to Salt Lake City. But as you can tell, I never made it back.
You never made it.
No.
Yep.
Salt Lake's lost, right?
Yeah. Became a wonderful experience. I mean, my life was changed just going to work for Craig in many different ways, not just architecture, but just being there and being in Los Angeles, it just changed my whole direction. The greatest part of it is I came from a pretty modest and I would say conservative kind of community. And
It being Salt Lake City and all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because I was always grateful to Craig because people say, well, what was that like? And I said, Craig Ellwood gave me the opportunity to work on buildings that I never would have worked on in Utah. There was never any chance, And so I was indebted to him that I just had the experience of being there and being able to design buildings. So I was just beholden to Mr. Ellwood. Was that his name? What was his first name? I can't remember.
Okay, it'll come to you.
Yeah, Craig or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Maria, what is it you want to capture about Craig Ellwood, the person, and his story in the film?
I guess what I want to capture is just all of the complexity and contradictions that live within him, and just this idea that he was able to make these beautiful buildings and yet at the same time just reconcile like all facets of him, just sort of like his narcissism, his flaws.
Aren't most of these stupendous architects kind of narcissistic? Isn't that running with the profession?
I suppose.
My mother would say yes to that.
Okay.
What about Jim?
He's not.
I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, I just to pierce to the, and get beneath the surface of the story and just get into his character as much as possible. And I think he's just a really interesting, compelling character and person to explore. And also to set a movie against a landscape of California modernism, there haven't really been any films that I think have done that successfully. So I think
Well, as soon as it comes out, we'll rent it and show it in North Carolina. No
Awesome.
problem.
Thank
No
you.
problem. You've got your first booking already.
Excellent.
Erin, I know that your dad was into cars. Like, what kind of cars did he have? I read about the Ferrari most often, but I know he had a bunch of them.
So he had, the first really crazy one I can remember was a Maserati. He had a Dino Ferrari. He had a Ferrari Daytona. He had a Lamborghini Miura. Italian was a theme.
Yeah.
He also had an Alfa Romeo that he had bought from a director in Europe that Mr. Tyler actually was given to Jim because Jim needed a car to get to work. So Jim had a red Alfa Romeo from Italy that Craig was sweet enough to let him have.
Do you still have it?
No,
No, it's gone?
but I had it for a long time.
Okay.
Because I just came from Utah. Craig was getting a new car, and the new car was a Lamborghini Miura. And so Craig says, Jim, you and Carolyn really should have another car. I said, we can't afford another car. And he says, why don't you take the Alfa Romeo, because I'm getting my other car. And I said, okay, I'll talk to Carolyn. And Carolyn says we can't afford it. We're not going to do it. So he talked to Carolyn. They were friends. And he says, Carolyn, you take it. And Carolyn says, no. He says, Carolyn, you take it and pay me whenever you want. And Carolyn says, well, okay, I'll do that. He says, I don't even care when you pay me. So it was so kind of him to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got the car. We got the pink slip and everything. And Carolyn felt so embarrassed. She just said, what'll we do? Craig, we got to set it up so I don't feel guilty about all this. And he says, oh, forget it. Keep the car.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, it was a funny story.
Who drove the car, Jim?
Oh, it was very bad. Uncle Jim drove the car for about a month and a half and had 5 speeding tickets.
Ooh. Ooh.
And my wife, Carolyn, said, that's it for you, Jim. I drive the Alfa Romeo. It was it was like a bullet, just like and it was a kind of a
Juliet.
orangey red color.
Gorgeous.
And my wife loved to drive it because guys in Porsches would drive up to the stoplight next to her and they'd gun it, and she'd go like she wanted to race them. But she loved to drive the car, but I got to drive it periodically.
Erin, tell us about your mother, and also understand that you have produced or are about to produce a little story about her and her version of events from that time.
Oh, I made a little short-form documentary with my creative partner, Gaston Gell. We just showed it after our lecture. It's just, we had this opportunity to shoot in the Smith house. They had finished restoring it, and it was just a beautiful, pristine, clean space. And Barton said, is there anything you'd like to do in this house? Do you want to have a party? Do you want to have a book signing party? Do you want to do something? And I just thought really what I wanted to do was inhabit it. I never lived in a Craig Ellwood house. So they gave it to us for 3 days. And we decided to shoot a little piece and brought my mother there. And we let her talk, and this story evolved, and that's all I'm going to tell you, because you're going to have to see it.
I'll have to see it myself.
Yes.
But tell us about your mother. She was an actress?
She was an actress. Her name is Gloria Henry. She's still with us. She's going to be 96 in April. She's amazing and beautiful. And, my father was married 4 times, and as Neil Jackson said in his book, did he say it in his book, or did he just say it? Maybe he just said it. That my father had 4 wives and 4 lives. So his entire architecture career, which spanned 28 years, was the length of my parents' marriage. They were together those 28 years. She supported him in the beginning because she was making more money. He had a studio behind the house on Barrington in L.A., and she helped him get off the ground. Then she got the show. She played the mother of Dennis the Menace on the Dennis the Menace show.
Oh, right, yeah. Is Dennis still around, Jay North?
Jay North is still around.
Okay.
Yeah. They still occasionally, I don't think my mother can do them anymore, but they have these what are they?
Conventions?
These conventions, yeah. My mother was doing them for a while, and they were all doing them. The one that played Margaret, Herb Anderson is no longer alive, the man that played my mom's husband, but the ones that remain would go to these things and actually do quite well. She was having a good time doing them, but it's just too hard for her now.
And she was active in acting until, what, about 6 or 7 years ago? She did a couple of spots, guest
Pretty
spots
much.
on shows?
Yeah. She got a call the other day. She said, my agent hasn't called me in like 2 years. She got a call, and it's over. It's just too hard. It's too hard to get around. So yeah, but she went on for a while. Yeah, she did good.
She's competing with Betty White.
All right. You know, that segment's very competitive. Barton, as you're working on these houses, do you get to live there? Do you, spend the night there?
Unfortunately not. I don't think that they're in any condition usually when you take them on to be able to sleep and inhabit the homes. I know when I finish, it's always a dream to be able to maybe crash there for at least a weekend or a night. But no, I have never slept in any of Craig Ellwood's designs that we've worked on. Oddly enough, most of the furniture sometimes, and I've always worked with the same collectors who give me all of Craig Ellwood's paintings that they own and his beds that he designed, and I've always thought to myself, what would it be like to sleep in Craig Ellwood's bed?
Right.
And never happened. Never happened. Yeah, literally. I think the only person who has actually ever inhabited one of these homes after we finished was Erin's mom.
Okay.
Erin came in and filmed.
So she spent the night there?
She didn't spend the night there,
Okay.
no. We just, we shot, for as long as she could take it.
Yeah.
And, but she didn't spend the night there. But sort of emotionally and
Connect with it.
Physically inhabited it.
As well, Erin's mom's furniture joined the other furniture within the house, and Erin brought her mom's furniture from her own home and put it in there and kind of made it their space. And I have to say, and I've always said this, that it's the warmest I've ever felt with an Ellwood energy in any of the homes was because Erin and Gloria came in the home. And I think Jim even made it up there on the Sunday to say hi to Gloria when they were filming at the Smith house. And he kind of did the big surprise, and they had a nice moment together.
And it had been many, many years. You hadn't seen her in, I feel like, 30 years or something.
Actually, your mom and I and Carolyn went to dinner a couple of times. She came from home and came to the Palisades, and we ate at a restaurant in the Palisades and just talked about old times. And then she went home, and then she came back again. I always wanted to get you and your brothers to come, It never ever materialized, but I don't know if it was 30 years, but I did see her after Dad passed away. Maybe it was 30 years. Time goes by so fast, but I thought it was shorter anyway.
I remember in my dad's office when I was 10, there was one of the young architects who had a photo of what I later learned was Craig Ellwood up on the desk with one of his cars. And this was what these guys aspired to. They wanted to be the successful architect in LA with a sports car, riding around, making celebrated architecture, getting published in places like Progressive Architecture and Arts and Architecture magazine. This was great. And my dad, who was sort of, disapproving of all this kind of stuff, would try to make them take it down because it was a large poster. I mean, it was a big poster they had hung up on the office.
I got to get one.
I
don't know.
I want one. Let's make one.
He was the first architect.
There you go.
He really was. Craig Ellwood basically defined California cool. I think he also defined the time of California. He's the only architect to ever have 3 case study homes built for John and Tenz's program. I think that's massive in the overall scheme of where we are today with the landscape and fantasy of architecture. You're looking at a guy who, where Jim's from in Utah, everyone wanted to move to California and honestly be Craig Ellwood that he went to school with in Utah. That was the guy to emulate and go for. And Jim said to me several times as we do these projects that, if he were still in this world today, he would have probably been up for, the Getty Museum. He would have been up for Disney Hall. It would have been to that level. He was that guy. He was the most charming architect probably in the world, and could hold a room. And I don't know, Jim always tells me that, there was nothing like it. And the most blessed part for me is to have heard over this time period of these past few years, I'm working on the Hunt House. It was the Architectural Record House of the Year. You're doing all these things and you're seeing all that, but the best has been able to spend time with Erin, meet Maria, and then also get the real Craig Ellwood story from Jim, from the office, from who he was, from the personal side. And you get to hear things such as there was just such a warmth to him as well, and he, admired Jim and respected him so much because I think Jim brought to the office what he did not have. So it was a great partnership, and you're looking at a guy from Salt Lake who's quite straight-laced, and then the playboy on the other end who's Craig Ellwood. So
I have a question about that. We had on a professor from Columbia who did a study of Hugh Hefner's influence on modernist design, furniture, and buildings. And I wondered, do you know if Craig was ever interviewed in Playboy?
I don't know that, but it's interesting because Neil Jackson called him. What did he say?
Neil Jackson, who wrote a biography essentially of Craig Ellwood, refers to his work as
Playboy architecture.
Playboy architecture, but not in the Hugh Hefner sort of ornate way, but more, like James Bond.
Okay.
More like suits, beautiful suits and Ronson lighters and bourbon on ice, that kind of Playboy. So I don't know if he was ever in the
It wouldn't, let's put it this way, it wouldn't surprise me if he did do that.
I'll have to see if I can look that up and find that for you.
It's interesting. Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Send you a copy of the article.
Right.
They're not in Pomona, that's for sure.
My dad didn't wear silk robes.
Not everybody did. I mean, he had, there's that famous photo that they have up in the Design Within Reach stores of all the furniture guys sitting around the room.
Oh, yeah.
Eames and Saarinen and a few others, and that Hefner was trying to promote at the time.
Wow.
That kind of, cool vibe, very sophisticated, very elegant, simple design. So odds are he probably did.
You're right.
I was just going to add something about Craig, and that was that when I went there, it was really a surprise to me because I knew he dressed nicely and things like that. I didn't expect to see what I saw, and that was, you would imagine, maybe Erin could tell me I'm a liar, but this was not really theatrics for Craig because it was pretty much intrinsic. And I don't know how it came out that way because he would come in the office and he was just Craig Ellwood. Yet other people who would talk about him would say, oh yeah, he's, he always has to have these cars. And I think he has too much in himself. He's too egotistical in that. But when he was in the office, he wasn't that way. Even when we met clients, he was not that way. Craig was intrinsically Craig Ellwood. For me, he wasn't a put-on. But as I say, I didn't know him outside of that. Maybe secretly he was, but to me, Craig Ellwood wasn't a put-on because he was just, for me, the natural Craig Ellwood. Craig had all these cars that we've talked about and so on, and he took a lot of pride in having the cars, and he was just fascinated by them. But he wanted to look natural in them. He just wanted to be this playboy guy that had cars. And he had bought a Ferrari Dino. It was a kind of a red Ferrari Dino, and he would drive it into the driveway every day, and then one day he drove in this clunker, just drove it in the driveway of the office. And so I'm just walking around, and I said to Craig, where's the car? And he says, what? And I says, where's the Ferrari? And he says, don't let anybody know, Jim, but I backed out of the garage and I went over to close down the garage door, and we have a fence behind us. They lived on this small street. and there was a fence behind it. And he said, I went over, put the garage door down, walked around, and I'm looking, I said, where's the car? And I look over there. He says, I hadn't put the emergency brake on, and I didn't have it in park. It was still in dry. He says it was in reverse. And I walked down there. He says, I just feared what was happening. And he says, I walked around and looked at the back of it. It was totally destroyed. So he says, don't tell anybody, but it's in the garage getting fixed.
That's what they did in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? He backed the Ferrari out of the house?
Yeah.
It was a great house.
Maria, last question. You're, 4 years into this project now, I think I heard mentioned?
No, not exactly. Well, we started doing a documentary and we filmed a bunch of interviews, and then Erin and I were working on other projects in the meantime, so now we're circling back to it.
Okay. When do you think we'll see it on the screen?
Well, I don't know, because right now we are trying to find financing and find partners to get involved, and the dream casting would be someone like Ryan Gosling. But we want to make it like
who's not cheap, right?
Yeah, we want to make it like a real movie.
Okay.
We need money to do that.
Is there a GoFundMe page or something that people can contribute to?
No, I don't really want to go that route.
Okay.
I really just want to pitch it and try to find some partners and get it made.
All right. Well, let us know if you set up something like that. We'll try to get the fans out for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Hey, thank all of you for joining me today. It's been a real fun to meet you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, George.
And we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much, George.
Great.
Thanks for listening. Want to hang out with US Modernist at Modernism Week in February next year? Send an email to george@usmodernist.org with your name and phone number. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special agent for Modernist houses. 919-995-0550. Okay, take us out, Tom.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 7,000 significant modernist houses, and access 2.5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Cindy Stratton, not her real name, researches guests from her secret underground lair. US Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Modernism Week edition of US Modernist Radio.